So, the title this morning is the content of Parashat Noach, which extends from the Deluge to the Tower of Babel. In the past and in the present, and maybe in the future. So, if we look at the first few verses concerning Noach, it says, Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav. The first verse, that Noach was a saint and a perfect man, generations. But then, a few verses later, when God saw the world had become filled with corruption and destruction, so he says, this is the end now of the human race. And therefore he says to Noach, who is the one person who found favor in the eyes of Hashem, says, the end, Kates kol basar, the end of all flesh has come before me. Because the whole earth has become filled with robbery and violence. So therefore you have to make an ark. And then it says a little later on, after he'd given him the commandment to make the ark, and it says, beginning of chapter 7, that Hashem said to Noah, God said to Noah, you and your family go into the ark, because I have seen you as a tzaddik lefanai bador hazeh, as a saint in front of me in this generation. So all the commentators ask the question concerning how the Almighty, how Hashem considered Noach. Because the first verse says, and this, after all, the revelation of Hashem, describing what happened, he said he was a tzaddik and a tamim. But then when it comes to the ark, he says, you are a tzaddik lefanai bador hazeh. You are a saint in front of me in this generation. So one, I would say, the deepest explanation of this apparent variant character description of Noah, and neither of these terms are used with regard to Abraham, Yitzchak, or Yaakov. It's true, Yaakov is called Ish Tam, but not called Tamim. Tamim means to be completely perfect in faith, but so is used later in the Chumash, Tamim Tziyam Hashem Elokecha. You should have complete faith in Hashem as guiding all situations. You should have faith in Him instead of just think it's fate, it's meaningless. That's the equivalent of Tamim and Tzaddik. We know in Jewish tradition, Yosef is known as a tzaddik, but this term is not used with regard to the forefathers and used with regard to Noah. And Noah had both characteristics. But when Hashem spoke to Noach, he only mentioned tzaddik, but he added to it, Bador Hazeh. What do you mean by saying this generation? Because Noach, he lived through the two different generations. He had a very long life, and he still witnessed the Tower of Babel. So he lived in that generation as well. But within the generation of the Deluge, is referred to only with the name Tzaddik. It says like this: the great sin of mankind, on account of which the Deluge came, was the corruption not only of individual and family life, which came about the enormous level of immorality, connected also with idolatry. The two went together. But not only that, also social corruption. And it was not just the society and the whole environment of the human being came filled with constant chaos and internal battles, who can have most for himself, and no form of self-control. Which was the deterioration, if we go back from the sin of Adam and Eve, then the sin of Cain, and then Cain's descendants were able to start what we would call civilization. And they found different means of also cultivating the land. It was the beginning of technology. But Lemech, one of his descendants, he made a song to his wives, and he said, listen to me, that our forefather, Tuval Cain, he produced tools which make it possible for us to start agriculture and industry. But they've been used lachaburati. They've been used for ways of killing and torturing other human beings. Other technology is not being used for positive purposes, but destructive and negative purposes. And then we have at the end of the book of Bereshit, just preceding these verses, that we have the powerful ones entirely manipulating the weak ones, not only with regard to possessions, but even with regard to the women. The powerful ones, in their pursuit for power and pleasure, so they found one of the weaker women, whether they were married or not, they raped them, they abused them. There was complete breakdown of any limitations on negative human passions. So in this it says, Hashem said, I'm giving up the world. Because he was looking, as we described already, he was looking to produce a world of human beings who would become partners with him in transforming this globe to Gan Eden. Instead of that, they became far removed from any such possibility, and this earth became a Gehinnom. So, he was a tzaddik, Noach. Despite all this, he could only retain his tzidkos by being locked inside the teva, as we described already.
He could only maintain his tzidkos.
Just a minute. So, this is interpretation given by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who, apart from being the master in his time of all halachic sources. So he became the author of the Shulchan Aruch, but he'd written other halachic works before. He was also a great master of the midrashic and the mystical traditions of Am Yisrael. He says like this, that the opposite of what was happening in the generation of Noach, of the Hamas, was tzaddik. In accordance with what is in Pirkei Avot, that Ezeu Gibor, the Kovish Yitzra, someone who can control his materialistic instincts, especially if it's in an environment which is the exact opposite, and he keeps control, like Noach did. He kept his faith in Hashem, but what was needed in the time of the Dor HaMabul was someone who was able to keep the control over the materialistic instinct that exists within the human being. And he controlled them. He didn't engage in no homos. He held his family closely together, did not allow any of the poisonous aspects of the environment to affect him. So therefore he was saved. And as a result he saved mankind. In other words, if we go back, Adam and Eve, fathers of mankind. Their seed, Cain and Hevel, one killed the other. And then Cain himself, ultimately, he had a descendant in started technology, Tuval Cain. And the others, they used the technology for killing people and torturing them. Technology not being used for its true purpose of productivity, but for destructivity. And then that came to an end, that generation. But Adam and Eve had another son, Shet. And then his generations also, they reached a level of the strong manipulating the weak socially and sexually, to such an extent that Hashem said, I'm giving them up. This can't continue. This brings the world back to chaos, except for one man, Noach. Noach survived, and then Noach began the history of the nations. So therefore, in the generation of the Mabul, he was a tzaddik. And that was what was necessary to oppose the pursuit of materialism, which had become so strong. And he was a survivor of that and preserved it. Then later on he even witnessed the Tower of Babel. And Tower of Babel also, he kept his faith. But Nimrod, mankind, they got together and they said, with the power of man and technology, perhaps not a single man, but it is a single man who can unite all human beings for one purpose, we can become stronger than God. And we'll make ourselves into the God. Man is the measure of all things. And we can forget about God. More than that, if God wants to bring, in fact they worked out that he might want to bring another deluge, we're going to protect this planet from any acts of God, because we can control it. Through our united efforts, we reach the highest level. That was Nimrod. So, he rebelled against Hashem. And Noach witnessed that generation also. But of course he had no power to change it, because he didn't have sufficient extrovert, outgoing powers within him, also his old age, to be able to change the world. And the one who did so was able to oppose Nimrod and not give in to him. And even though he was put into a furnace of fire, he survived it. And as a survivor, he recognized even more so how he is the one now who's got to start a brave new world. but you can't do it as an individual. And therefore we find, in any case, because the Tower of Babel became destroyed through bringing a Babel of languages and misunderstandings, this led to the weakening of the great ambition to create not a state where the state should rule and all individuals should be cogs in the wheel of the state, and ideally it should become a world state, everyone work together, then we could do even more. We can build satellites in outer space, and man will control this planet, and God will have, even those who believe there might have been a God, there might be still one in the high heavens, but he have no influence on the human being. Which quality was required to resist this? Was the quality of tamim. Tamim tiyem Hashem Elokecha. And that's why it says tzaddik bador hazeh, and tamim in the other generation, tamim tiyem Hashem Elokecha, to preserve true faith. And he did preserve it in a certain way, in limited fashion, in a place called Shalem, Malkitzedek Melech Shalem, that was Yerushalayim. They preserved it, and there anyone who wanted to find out more was able to study the Noachide Code, which was given to Noach straight after the deluge. And then when Abraham recognized the greatness of Hashem, he also found out about Shem Ve'eva and established an association with them. But he went much further. In other words, you can say that Shem and Eva, they provided in an age of agnosticism, atheism, and putting the power of man in place of the power of God, they provided the shelter of a Shiva, which is close to these influences. But what did Avraham Avinu do? He went and brought the power of Torah to all those places where there was no Torah. He didn't keep in one place. Travel from place to place. Hashem sent him especially to Eretz Canaan, which was, after all, surrounding this close yeshiva of Shem and Eva, from which we know that both Yitzchak and Yaakov benefited greatly. Avraham found him a complete ally of Shem was the son of Noah. Eva was a descendant of Shem who carried on. And that produced, in the end, also Avraham HaIvri. Avraham, who was on one side of the world and was ready to go and battle for Hashem with a one-man party against mankind. And to some extent, he won the battle, but not completely. But he will win the battle in the future. That was promised, and that's what we're waiting for. And from this, I'm going to come down now to the following. That to see what relevance this has for today, I had the great zechus to sit at the feet, to some extent, of Rav Dessler, who was one of the deepest scholars of what's called the Musa movement, but he was very wide and deep in his knowledge. In the year 1944, when he was in that country that was constantly threatened by the Axis, by Hitler, Great Britain, he founded a koilel to make it a little teva. That was the idea, like we described it, where people should be sheltered from the terrible chaos and cruelty which existed in the world, and also from the pursuit of materialism, which was constantly growing throughout the 19th and 20th century. So then he wrote a very fascinating essay. It was a talk, really, that he gave in the Koilon, which has enormous relevance for us today. I'm giving it to you in Hebrew. Rav Kam also translated in Strive for Truth. I'd like to do parts of it with you. You can, those of you who can follow the Hebrew, could look at his words. And the subject is that when materialistic knowledge increases, and in truth this is the greatest problem, we know, is mankind progressing or is it retrogressing? In fact, if one studies the basis of the biological theory of evolution, which does not have much proof, but it was a popular theory developed, but was not just developed in the age of scientific more discoveries, more technology, but because of the feeling of most intelligent human beings that the ancient times were all barbaric and wanted to study the history of human beings. They go from a primitive level to a progressive level. And we keep on progressing to a higher level. And they thought in the 19th century, we are at the apex, the highest level ever reached by the human race. And we're going to go further and further with progress. And there's constant progress. Certainly there is progress in knowledge and in discovery. So the older the human race becomes, the higher it comes. So this also then applied to try and understand altogether different species. They all say the same. That's happened to man since the beginning of what we regard as external and materialistic development of life on this globe. Then most probably it has also existed from the amoeba, just the very smallest piece of plasma, until we have the human being. And they said, well, even the Bible goes a bit in that direction. And they were great thinkers, like Rav Kook, for example, a very deep thinker, who even wanted to, this concept developed also by quite a lot of the evolutionists who were strong believers in God. They said, this is the way God, you see how it develops it, we high in a high stage. But what happened? What did we see? The most cultured nation which produced some of the greatest geniuses in the world of scientific discovery, in the world of music, in the world of philosophy, the greatest mind, they turned out to be beasts and brutes and do things that we don't find in the most primitive animal world. What's happening? So this in 1944, this is just an introduction to this. It's a fantastic description, also to understand the Midrash. This shir is a lot based on Midrash, where there's things easily understood or different understood. All the Midrashim, including the Zohar, they understand that the words of the Bible, you can understand them even at the simple level. And they have a moral impact on all human beings from childhood upwards. But there's no end to the depth contained in the lessons we can learn by Dorash, by going deeply into search. How do these verses apply to us? But before I start on that, if you've got any questions,
yes,
it's better.
Go first?
Time for questions.
Okay. You spoke about acts of God. In the physical reality, there is no separate entity or power called nature. It's directed and willed by God, correct? Okay.
When? Why correct?
So all over the
Well, why
planet,
correct? Huh?
we have twisters, typhoons, tornadoes, earthquakes, causing massive destruction of lives, injury, property, etc., etc. So God wills this on the planet. So where is God of mercy if he willfully manifests himself by wholesale destruction all over the planet continuously?
So, in the Mishnah, which we're studying at present, there's a reference, a clear reference, to this paradox. It says, if you see the seas, the hills and the valleys, which, according to what we know, have existed since the time of creation, which blessing do we say? Can you answer? Which blessing? What's the blessing? Baruch atah Hashem oseh ma'aseh bereshis. The blessing we say is, blessed Hashem, who created the work of creation. If you can assume that these seas, these rivers, these mountains existed from the time that Hashem created them, and they are things of beauty, that's the blessing you say. But if you see earthquakes, tornadoes, and tsunamis, and thunder and lightning, then you say which blessing? Shekocho v'urato malei olam. His strength and his force fill the world. The juxtaposition in the mission of these two is then followed by good news and bad news. It says, if you hear bad news, then you say the blessing, Hashem is dain ha'emet. He's the judge of truth. His judgment to bring tragedy is the true will of Hashem. For example, when do we say it? Unfortunately, when someone dies. We can also say it on, we know a whole lot of people were involved in this accident. But it's a big tragedy. You say dain ha'emet. According to the verse in the Chumash, which says, Hatzur tamim polo, yichol derachav mishpat, which is part of the recital at the time of a Levaya, the creator, which Tzur means a painter, he's a painter, paints beautiful pictures. Because with the way in which Hashem has formulated some of the beings of nature, there's such beauty in flowers, such beauty in all the variety of birds. Enormous, what a tzayah, what a tzur. Tamim polo, all his work is perfect. Because, and also, in life, all his ways are just, still just. We say, he's a man, he's a God who's faithful, who does no evil. That's what we declare to Levaya. When people feel down, they say, why has this happened to me? Or people say, why do I have these sicknesses? And then ultimately, the terrible death. Why does it happen? We still say it's perfect. So therefore, this is the big question. And it's clear that the mission itself, bringing these two sets of blessings. First, with regard to what happens in what we call the natural phenomena of nature which surround us. And then what happens in the history, the personal history of human beings. That, as we say in the Shema every day, that's explained also a bit later in the Mishnah, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, it's printed in other places also, that you should love Hashem b'chol me'odecha. What's in b'chol me'odecha? B'chol midah or midah she'modet lo che'b'modi lo. Whatever quality He shows you in life, if He shows you positive blessings of children, of peace, of prosperity, beauty, we thank Hashem for these beautiful aspects of life. What happens if He sends you suffering? You should also thank Him, even when you're suffering. Otherwise, because, and it says, should love Hashem. And this is, the love of Hashem means that you love Him, even if He brings suffering, because you recognize He knows more than I do. In fact, the Mishnah goes on with other aspects of this double situation. When you say Shechayonom, when you say different blessings. So, we know life is a rhythm between light and darkness, between good things that happen and evil things that happen. And there are many religions, dualistic in nature, who say there are two powers, two different powers in the world. The power of Hashem that's good, this is the basis of the Zoroastrian religion, but aspects of it also go into people's outlook upon life. There seem to be two powers around, powers of good and powers of evil, in man and outside man. Ask me, why does Hashem do it? So I will go right back to the account in the first chapter of the Chumash, where it says, at the end of the sixth day, that it says, God saw everything that He had made, and behold, it was very good. Tov ma'od. Midrash says, Tov, that's this world. Tov ma'od is the next world, but there's another, very much, something else. Tov means life, and ma'od means death. Mita. Then they say, Tov means the Yetzer Tov, and Tov Ma'od means the Yetzer Hara. In other words, God has created a world where we witness Midat Hadin, strict judgment. We also witness Midat Rachamim. Midat Rachamim is only good. We have both these qualities which exist in the world around us and exist within us. And we have so why did Hashem do it? So this here goes to the Midrashim and the Zohar, or the inner Torah, we call it Pnimut Torah. We explain as follows: the essence, even the Shema that is Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hashem, we know, is the one who consistently gives and gives and gives. He gives us thought, He gives every aspect of life. He's the giver of existence. That's literally what it means. He's the one who caused existence. That's the midah HaChesed. That's the Chesed of Hashem. Elokim is judgment. Because if you wish, we'll go back or forwards to the anthropic view of the universe, which is being adopted by many scientists. This globe, if it would be a little nearer to the sun, would burn up. If it were further away from the sun, it would freeze. Mm-hmm. So, and it was once thought many things are just happenings, just by chance. But many scientists, the discovery of science to some extent, as Einstein already developed, and is being developed more and more recent scientists, is to discover the harmony of nature, that there are so many harmonious aspects, going into great detail even that the laws of nature seem to work according to detailed mathematical principles. Equals mc squared is one of them. But there are other aspects, many aspects. Therefore they say, it would appear that there's anthropic means the purpose of the globe is to produce the human being. It's the ultimate purpose. This purposefulness is dying in nearly everything. And the science is constantly discovering more design. In other words, a human being who's been given an intelligence on a high level which he can develop, whereby he can understand many things that happen in the world if he uses his mind. And all those things can be used for the good, but they can also be used for evil. In other words, man is being given the creative power to go and reach a higher level of evolution, not to be like the beasts, but to be higher than the beasts. Not to be a robot, but with his own Tselem Elokim, his divine image, he can be creative. God himself can build the world and can destroy it. Why is it, what we see in the Chumash, why is he destroyed? Because his purpose is, in other words, the basis is, God is, and this is the essence of God according to the Torah, God is the source of absolute morality. And therefore, this is the enormous contradiction which exists in these fundamentalist so-called religious movements. They believe in God, but they destroy morality. Morality lies deep in every human being, and they are destroying it. And the Tselem Elokim is the divine image, whereby a person can feel, I'm free. I'm free to pursue the good, as it says also in the Chumash in a few places. Life is identified with virtue and death with vice. A person who brings vice into his life, that's his abusing and suppressing the divine image which should be created. And the purpose of man is to live in the divine image. To create a situation on this globe, there'll be constant loving kindness, overcoming all materialistic aspects to reach a higher level of feeling the presence of the moral God in our lives. Now, we know in order to develop morality where we've been given the freedom to be immoral, for that Hashem needs the Midat Hadin. And the Midat Hadin is good. All punishments mentioned in the Torah to be given to human beings are an atonement for the sin. They're not for what we generally call vengeance. They're a deterrent to stop, when sinning reaches a certain boiling point and is about to cause enormous harm, then we have to punish the instigator of it. It's part of the law of the Torah, and part also of the universal law given to all the nations of the world. Given to Noah also explicitly in the Chumash, that is the duty of the followers of Noah, to whom Hashem revealed his will and told them, society has to remove murderers. And don't think that people who will murder will be able to rule the world, because they'll become destroyed and they'll destroy the world. And if they become too powerful, then Hashem will use acts of destruction. Now the reason why Hashem puts often his destructive acts of God, as they're called also in today's language, and he puts them onto innocent people, it's because this is the way to teach a lesson that these people have to learn. Innocent people will also they're involved in a cosmic situation in which Hashem will act like, unfortunately, human beings even have to act if you're dealing with a greater threat. to Hashem also, but he's got his own considerations. He still has a judgment of each person based upon the principle that innocent and saintly people, when their bodies die, their souls go on existing. This is all part of it. Life is on this planet, and life is also on a higher planet. Now, how is that scientific? It didn't used to be thought scientific, but it's scientific to find today that some biggest scientists, they recognize that there's a higher planet, a spiritual one, the spiritual world, which exists all the time. We're not aware of it. But when people have a strong near-death experience, then they live, they can see without a body, without their bodily function of sight, they can hear without bodily function of hearing, and they're in a world of love and light. Just have to read the book by Alexander, Professor Alexander, Harvard professor of brain surgery. He's also a top surgeon, and all the descriptions of the millions of records of near-death experiences, he understood them to be psychological illusions. When it happened to him, so he said, he wrote a book and has a website that says, no, but this is the true life, the spiritual life that comes after death, when the personality of the human being reaches a high level, not a low level. And that's maybe Hashem has especially put it into our generation, because as mankind increases, become nearer to the time when the potential fulfillment of mankind, recognizing the whole world will be filled with the knowledge of God, the people recognize that this is the Midat Hadin needs to work in order to purify mankind, bring us to that high level. Now, to understand this more, actually this essay of Dessler goes into this very deeply, in connection also with the report given in the Chumash concerning especially concerning the Deluge and the Tower of Babel.
So, just to follow up, so in all these so-called natural destructive occurrences, the attribute of justice overrules the attribute of mercy.
Yes.
And because of the sins of mankind. So we're continuously being punished. Is that it? Continuously, past, present, and future.
No. As we say, in time when the earth will be filled, that's what he said, there'll be no more wars. That's even what's accepted by the League of Nations, United Nations. They put it on the wall of their building. That's a true prophecy, toward which we have to do our part. And there can come a time when when we get back to the situation which apparently existed, according to Midrashim, before the deluge, when there weren't such acts of God. In fact, that's why some say you should. The question is, if you say on earthquakes and on thunder and lightning, you say the blessing Oseh Maaseh Bereshit, halachically you have fulfilled your duty, because it's Oseh. I think it's only because there's continuous creation. But others say Oseh Maaseh Bereshit you should only say on those aspects which definitely existed from the time of creation. And maybe there was an earthquake. Who knows there was an earthquake when word was created, as described in the Chumash. Maybe then there was an era when there was constant spring, there wasn't even the difficulty of winter, where people sometimes freeze to death and so on. So it would appear in the times of the Mashiach, maybe those acts of God will not be necessary. Okay. Because mankind will continue to exist on a different planet. Obviously, the spiritual dimension will be connected even with the physical dimension, as it was by Moshe Rabbeinu when he was on the mountain, where he didn't eat or drink for 40 days, and he spoke with Hashem, He came down from the mountain, and his face was shining strongly. That's the origin of Michelangelo's horns, as you know. When I was a youngster, so I still remember going on a trip with my sister. We went to the youth hostel. I was always wore a cap. They asked me, they all asked, came up there, please take a cap off, we want to see your horns. Where are your horns? Because the word karan means to shine. And the Greek and Latin translation, especially the Latin one, also Kona, translates it as horns, ki karan, or the skin of Moshe shone with rays, strong rays of light coming up. But his translation in the Vulgate, that's the Latin translation, it says that the skin on his head produced horns. Karan upenei Moshe. So that in the time of the Mashiach, a bit later probably, according to, I don't know if it's going to happen, but there'll be some form of closeness to Ziva Shechina. As it says, the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of Hashem. Okay. So tomorrow, Hashem will continue with his essay and further questions.
Mashiach now.